Number 3, the third food assumption is that food safety can only come from the federal government. You can't have food safety from anywhere else. The ugly truth is that the food police actually measure their performance on the basis of pounds of food inspected per inspector hour. Just like in corporate America, I'm used to giving a speech somewhere. In corporate mentality, we measure performance in pounds per person hour, number per person hour. That same corporate mentality of measuring performance based on volume per person hour is taken into the food inspection service and used to measure inspector performance based on pounds or volume of material under the inspector's nose. And so there's this tremendous inspection service prejudice and discrimination against small operations and community-sized abattoirs and canneries and food processors due to the fact that you can't get the volume to be efficient with economies of scale and present the notion that we are efficient. They don't like to stand there at a small plant because it's inefficient. They consider themselves wasting time. Well, I got a response to this. And here's the response. All innovation requires embryonic prototypes. All of them. That's why a tree doesn't germinate itself from a 20-foot sapling. It starts from a little itty-bitty seed. Because that's the smallest form of that life that encapsulates all the pieces, and it's portable, it can be carried, and if it dies, there's more behind it. You know, it doesn't upset the mothership Earth if that one little seed dies. And so what happens when you have an economy of scale mentality in the food inspection service that discriminates against small-scale prototypes, it means that the introduction scale of innovation to the food commerce system has to be so big that the embryo can't be birthed. And so a little artisanal cheesemaker that would love to milk a cow and make some cheese and try it out in her community, she can't do it because it has to be a freestanding, quintuple inspected, agriculturally prohibited facility before she even makes 1 pound of cheese. And so the dreams and the opportunities and the antidote to pathogenic food are precluded from innovating into food commerce because of the prejudice against small-scale operations. It's one thing to require a $10,000 thermometer on charcuterie if you're making a half a tractor trailer load at a time. It's quite another to require that same thermometer if you're making a 5-gallon bucket at a time. And I could keep you up all night with real stories of even people that I've already met right here in Australia wrestling that can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. That there are people who would love to buy their food, people who want to grow their food, and the food would actually solve the pathogen problem in the food system, but they're precluded because of capricious, malicious, asinine, prejudicial food regulations from the food board. Number 4, the next assumption. Food safety, in order to measure food safety, it's all about a lethal dose. We have this lethal dose mentality. What does it take to kill you? I'm reminded of my friend Bill Wolf trying to get kelp seaweed into the country as a fertilizer, and he had to fill out an Environmental Protection Agency paperwork on lethal dose, to go on the paperwork. Well, we fed all this seaweed to these rats, and they just got bigger and slicker and healthier and all that. So in desperation, he finally filled a bucket of water, he put some seaweed in there, dumped the rat in, drowned him, and he said, 5 gallons to 1. We have this idea that if it doesn't kill you quickly, it's okay. And that's how we've come out with this ridiculous idea that it's perfectly safe to feed your kids Twinkies, Cocoa Puffs, and Mountain Dew, but that raw milk, compost-grown tomato, and Aunt Matilda's pickles might kill you. As long as it's a slow death with a lot of chronic arthritis and obesity and type 2 diabetes and all, then it's fine. And what this does is it creates a food system that is actually deadly for our internal 3 trillion member community. But since it happens over time, nobody thinks anything about it. See, living food is full of bacteria. In fact, there's growing evidence that the hygiene hypothesis, where we're actually sterilizing everything, is actually creating immunodeficiency among our young people. Because what happens is, when the immune system is not exercised with small doses of exercise, it becomes lethargic, and then when something really comes along like pollen or cat dander, it overreacts into asthma and goes ballistic. That's why I'm such a proponent of children's gardens. When children grow up and all they do is exercise their thumbs sitting in front of a video display screen, it really prejudices their view to life. I mean, for one thing, if their car wreck, they run a car race, if their car wrecks, you wait 10 seconds, the machine gives you a new one. You're fighting the bad guys, and if your guy happens to get killed you wait 10 seconds and the machine gives you a new guy. That's not the way life is. If you don't water your tomato plant and it wilts and dies, you don't wait there 10 seconds and the thing resurrects. I think that this whole gaming thing of raising children is bringing to the world an incredibly arrogant, disconnected idea that I've got the world by the tail, baby, and it doesn't matter about all these relationships that we deal with in the ecology. And if we're going to raise a generation that comes to nature humbly and awestruck, it's going to be young people who have raised a rabbit, raised a chicken, put their hands in raised something with corn, and are doing that. But beyond that, there's a physical thing. Beyond the spiritual, there's a physical element that if we're not getting splinters or getting some calluses or doing anything like that, we're actually creating a lethargic immune system. And no health system in the world can make a culture healthy when its soil and its people are not healthy from good food. Well, let's go to, where is it? I thought I had these things in here. Yeah, here we are. All right, number 5. All right, number 5. Food gets safer the farther it is removed from the farm. The farther we get that away from the farm, get it into some, irradiation lights and some stainless steel and some refrigerators, it gets cleaner. And this all comes back to the fact, to the notion that there is a way, as we get it away from the farm, we get it away from germs and stuff that we can then zap. And we're still wrestling with this old, outdated notion that was the battle between 2 Frenchmen in the 1800s. One was named Louis Pasteur, who advanced the germ theory. He looked at these little germs under the microscope and said, "Ooh, those are bad guys. We got to kill them. Kill those guys. Annihilate them." But there was a contemporary named Michel Beauchamp who said, "Au contraire." He said, "Yeah, there are bad guys out there, but what allows them to get to me is not them as much as it is a breakdown in my immunological hedge of protection that lets them get me." So the question is not how do we kill the germs, it's how do we build hygiene, sanitation, and an immune system. Remember, this isn't a time when they're debating, should we wash surgical instruments between amputations. And so Beauchamp said, what we need to do is we need to create a terrain that keeps the bad guys in check. And of course, that was right along with today's naturopathy, homeopathy, chiropractic, iridology, massage, all the acupuncture, all of the arts in healing that are quackery, as opposed to the other kind. And it drives this idea today that the biological side is not science-based. Let me tell you about science-based in the U.S. Science-based is genetically modified organisms, feeding dead cows to give us bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Science-based is mandatory irradiation. Whose science? Let me ask you a question. If we wanted to create a terrain, a pathogen-friendly terrain on a farm, let's say, man, I want to grow pathogens. Boy, that would just make my day. Let's grow pathogens. How would we do it? Well, the first thing we would do is we would only have one species on that farm. No diversity. We just want one species. And then we would crowd that species up real tight against each other so the pathogens don't have to work to try to stay alive. They've always got a host, within jumping distance. And then we would make sure we never give a rest from that host. So the pathogens always have a host there to work with. And we would make sure that they don't have fresh air and sunshine. Lock them up into a confinement, concentration camp house. So they don't get fresh air and sunshine. And make sure they don't get any exercise. Don't have it. Let them all be couch potatoes. All strung up, real tight together. Close as possible. We would put them on slats and wire and concrete. So there's no living biology in the bedding. We'd spray it all down with fumigants and chlorine and all this to sterilize everything. And we'd feed them junk food, like artificially fertilized corn and no salad bar. And give them a junk diet. What have I just described? Modern, science-based agriculture. This is a terrain. But where in the food safety laws will you see any of these things addressed? It's all assuming we can feed it in fecal filth with respiratory mucus abrasions that allow the nitrate particulate to go right into the bloodstream and nitrify the blood and to destroy the hemoglobin. But it's okay if we zap it with some irradiation out here 1,000 miles away at the processing plant. That's food safety. It's crazy. Societal prejudice against dirt and visceral connection with our ecological umbilical is unbelievable. No society has ever had the luxury of putting this little effort in acquiring, preserving, distributing, and preparing food. This thinking that food gets cleaner the farther away it gets from the farm is completely aberrant thinking in civilization's history. Number 6, government agents are more trustworthy than business people. That's a huge assumption. I mean, as if putting a backwards collar on a guy makes him not chase the church secretary. This prejudice against business, this assumption that I as a farmer want to kill my customers, that a chef wants to kill his diners, that a caterer wants to have everybody at the party go home with diarrhea. Give me a break. This is my business. I mean, it is the height of unreasonableness to even assume that a government agent is more trustworthy than a business person. Of course, I know people ask, well, what about dirty farms? They're all not as clean as yours. Sure, I've visited plenty of farms that I wouldn't eat their stuff. But at least it's just one little farm. It's not the whole system. See, we're talking here about how do we preserve an opportunity for somebody else to be able to come up with a clever answer to the problems many of us face. One of our problems right now is that we don't have a good way to prototype these things. New Scientist had a fascinating article about as we move more and more control to the federal level, we can't prototype solutions on a small level. Just imagine if what's your smallest political division here in Australia? A town, a borough, a what? A council? All right. Just imagine if your council decided our locality is going to have a free trade local food commerce zone. And anybody can buy any food that they want to from anybody they want to, and a farmer can sell any food that he produces and sell it to his neighbors. And if two people want to do business together, it's the right of private contract, and if they want to smell around, act around, look around, and have transparency in their transaction and have a relationship with their food, they can do it. Now, if after a year, that locality, sure enough, fills up the hospitals with people with sicknesses due to dirty food, maybe we shouldn't offer that free. But what if those local people started enjoying butter instead of margarine, and started enjoying compost-grown tomatoes instead of sterile superphosphate cardboard red orbs? What if people lost weight? What if people got healthy because they're eating properly ratioed omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids through their pastured eggs, and beef that's not feedlot, but actually beef that's grass-finished and processed locally, not in a slaughterhouse of 5,000 animals a day, but done lovingly on the farm that it was raised on and grown on by the farmer who loved the calf and nurtured him and took care of him and wiped his nose and whatever. But what if people actually got well and the hospital went out of business? See, the problem is we can't even ask that question or answer that question because the top-down requirements are so strong, the council can't do that. And ultimately, if we can't determine our own food future, then what benefit is it to be able to determine our own religious future or our political future? Is not who owns this the fundamental question? Number 7, consumers are ignorant and need to be protected from themselves. That's very normal. All these, I know in the U.S. our food police routinely say we can't trust people to make these decisions. They're ignorant. They're stupid. Let me ask you something. How's the best way to get people to make responsible decisions? What is it? Letting them make a mistake. You're exactly right. Giving them the responsibility for their decision making. How's the best way to create ignorant consumers? Take away the responsibility for decision making. Fundamentally, if we want people to be informed, then we want to give them decision making power.